Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to Tarantino this. I'm going to tell you the end, and then we're going to go back through the beginning, and we're going to actually go through the story or whatever. So the lessons that we learned at Cerner were to be patient, but also be hungry. Look outward into the chef community and to the people at Chef for help. You're definitely not going to be able to please all the people all the time, and know what constraints you have and work within them. And our recommendations are to have an actual focused team. Configuration management's not going to just happen. Focus on the workflow that you actually have for your company and your solutions. Incent your community to work together. I'm going to talk about how we actually incented our community to work together. And then define your collective organization, like how you're going to use roles, data bags, and environments. Educate yourself and everyone around you, and involve your friends at Chef. So if anybody wants to see my slides, they're already out on SlideShare under slideshare.net/Aaron Blythe. So about me. If you're looking for me on the internet, you'll find me with this weird picture. I run the Kansas City DevOps meetup group. I work at Cerner Corporation, and this is a company where we've ridden technology for the last 35 years. Initially, we were a company that was a consulting company, and then when fax machines came out and they were amazing technology, we took it to where when the hospital was waiting for the results to come back from labs, instead of a human currying that across town, we got that across town in 15 minutes to an hour to get better medical results. So we've always been about like automating the medical workflow, working through green screens into the Windows revolution. And this is what one of our patients' rooms looks like now. So this is what we have is like one of our connected beds in Florida. Everything's connected into a patient-centric EMR, which is the electronic medical record. You'll probably hear a lot about this from Obamacare and meaningful use that's going on right now. So 20% of the medical healthcare data in the United States is flowing through one of our systems. And that, for the most part, is running in one of our data centers. So chances are that you, as an individual or someone that you know, has been to a hospital and you have a record that's in one of our systems. So we've expanded out. Initially, like I was talking about, it was the lab and getting those results across town. And then it was the hospital. And now it's pretty much anything that has to do with the medical industry, including like pharmacies and extended care facilities, even home care where the nurses are going out and using iPads and taking care of people in their homes and stuff. So on that 35-year journey, we spent about the last 5 years with Chef, and starting in 2011 when only a few of us at Cerner were even using Chef, and we didn't even know each other. For the most part, like it was like, oh, you're using Chef? That's really cool. What is that? At the beginning of 2012, we started to embark on a big data revolution within our company. So like I was saying, we've got 20% of the healthcare data for the United States all in these separate systems, and they're in Oracle databases. Now we're actually starting to ETL this up into the cloud, into Hadoop databases, and then we're actually presenting a new form of our EMR for the physicians on an iPad. So this was the perfect time to bring in automation because we're about to set up machines that need consistency across the board. So we started using Chef for this, and we're using Enterprise Linux. And the first thing we did, we made a really great decision, was to fork Chef because it didn't work exactly how we wanted it to work, right? So we needed to change about all of 5 lines of code, and then we were using, I think it was Chef 0.10.8 at the time. So we had our own fork of Chef. Having our own fork of Chef led to even more awesome decisions because the regular bootstrap wasn't going to work because I was going to put the regular machine, or the machine code on there. So we needed to write our own bootstrap. Then we had to make sure that we got that bootstrap out to everybody. And during the bootstrap, at the time, Red Hat, even though it was Red Hat 6, had an amazingly old version, I think it still does, of Ruby. I think it was 1.8.6. So we decided we're going to use RVM on every machine. Even though Chef and RVM told us that was a terrible idea, we're an enterprise, so we always know best. But to go back, this wasn't, at this particular time, this was January 2012 through about late March 2012, and we were moving really fast to get to MVP on a massive Hadoop scale with an iPad running on it. So we were making a lot of decisions really quick. So to give you the time frame, this was like right before the initial commit was made for Omnibus. So we closed out that year, and everybody at Cerner loved Chef. We loved Chef so much that we ended up with over 50 open source Chef servers. The authorization and authentication model in open source Chef at the time was such that we just didn't do it. Like, if you wanted to do Chef, then you would use our quick scripts that we built, and you would just spin up another Chef server. And you'd have your Chef server for dev, you'd have your Chef server for non-prod, you'd have your Chef server for prod, and then there was like umpteen teams that needed these. So this led to a bunch of interesting questions like, which Chef server is that actually running on? Is this wiki page up to date with the Chef server to connect to? What's the admin password? Can we double bootstrap it? Is this the original fork? Is this? And it just ad nauseum. We just had question after question. So at this point in our evolution, we had basically what I'd consider to be a messy kitchen. But it wasn't that messy. It wasn't like we were like filthy hoarders or whatever. We had just basically like a messy kitchen, like we had been cooking too much, and we figured that we'd clean up all that technical debt later. So we had to step back and say, what was the value proposition that we were actually using Chef? Why were we using it in the first place? And what we wanted to get out of Chef was infrastructure as code. We wanted repeatable, testable deployments, and we wanted that consistency. We wanted to stage everything like we were going to do a production deploy. So it was actually 2 years ago this week, on April Fool's Day, that Adam Jacob came out to Kansas City, and we had our first meetup for the Kansas City DevOps meetup. And Adam did one of his slide decks that just kind of like caught fire kind of across our company. Later that week, I was given the nod to start building an operations infrastructure team, which I would consider to be a DevOps team. I know that that's a hot topic right now. You shouldn't call it a DevOps team, or you should, based on what Adam said this morning. But at this point, what we knew we were going to be was a tools team. We were going to be responsible and in charge of our Chef deployment, which had grown out of hand, our Splunk deployment, and our Zabbix deployment. And then later on that month, I got to come to my first ChefConf. So when I got back from that, I wrote an internal blog, and the things that I saw at that first conference was I'd never been in a room with that many system engineers that were all smiling, like almost giddy. It was as if like all of us actually knew a secret. And I kind of see that same thing here 2 years later at this conference. Like everywhere I look, people are really happy, and there's really awesome things that are going on through the use of Chef. So we started to build our team. And over time, we got 8 of some of the most talented people in operations and development around the company, and we built up the team. So in talking to Chef, I got the opportunity to interview Paul, the senior VP here at Chef. And in that interview, Paul and I connected on our shared love of writing. And we both love that through writing, you have the ability to persuade people, and it's kind of becoming a lost art. So we want to make sure that we always keep our message short. We state exactly how we feel, and we use different mediums, but we just keep repeating that message. Adam talked a little bit about this morning. And at that particular time, the list at Chef, and it's since changed. This is not the current list, but it gets updated and it gets iterated through constantly at Chef. But the list at Chef at that time was fuel the love of Chef, make it easy to be successful, give organizations reasons to buy, and be their favorite company to work with. Speed matters, be disruptive. So I took that to heart. I was like, Paul sat down with Adam Jacob and sat down with other people at Chef, and they built a list. And we didn't really have anything like that. We had a lot of talented people. We had some awesome tools. But if you take one thing from my talk, this is what I think you should take away, is that I highly recommend you do this. Sit down in a room with your team and simply write "we believe" on the board and let everybody just go and talk about the things that they actually believe that your team's character is. We did this with our team, and it was freeing to actually define our character. Like once we knew what our character was, then we had constraints on like what it was that we needed to do, so then we could actually move a lot faster. So we sat down and did this exercise, and this has since changed, but that first time we sat down, we decided that we believe that a minimum number of associates need to directly touch the nodes, approaching 0. This is very similar to what we just heard from Yahoo. They don't want anybody to SSH on the node ever. They want to move everything through their pipeline. These tools matter, that they improve the lives of our users. So the people that we go and have lunch with, or we go out and hang out with, or play video games with, like the people we sit next to, we want to make their life better. And that's like something that we keep like really close to our heart. So something we think about every day. We, of course, want to automate all the things, and all the tools that we use should be hardened so that we can find root cause and drive to corrective action. So our identity that we sat down and kind of mapped out that day was that we're both a tools team and a culture team. We don't want to just wrap ourselves around. We just want to make these tools available for someone to use. We want to make it like awesome for them. So being both a tools team and a culture team, we wanted to be a helpful team. And that's why I think that that's actually can be called a DevOps team. So we took from that we learn, we implement, we help, and we teach. Michael Getz, if you see him around at the conference, give him a big hug. In that year, he came out and we went in a room and we basically talked about the way we were using Chef and how we didn't like it. Basically like hour-long bitch sessions where we would have like different teams come in and tell us like, here's what I do like, here's what I don't like, and we made a bunch of do's and don'ts, which ended up in like a series of whiteboards. And my favorite whiteboard was like where we actually whiteboarded like everything that we had heard all week in the course of about an hour or two. And one of the things that we drew up on that whiteboard was what we ended up referring to as the olive. So you can see the olive there. And we turned around and we made this into a slide and we made a blog around it, and we took this to our users because we wanted to be very upfront with our users and explain to them like how things were going to be going forward. Because a lot of people, even though they loved Chef, they were very confused because there was just so many ways to do everything. They actually needed those rails. So if you look at our Venn diagram, we have the entire universe of all the Cerner associates, but then we have the Cerner associates that actually use Chef, and then we have the outspoken few. And we knew that outspoken few, no matter what we did, they weren't going to be happy. So we told them that. Like, we know you're not going to be happy with whatever we do, but we're going to put the rails here, you stay on the rails, and then we'll also leave the door open for you guys to innovate. So I took this slide, it was actually that week, and I got in front of just like a 10-minute blurb in front of one of our organizations, and I said to them, I go, we're going to take away knife. How do you guys feel about that? And it was a room of about 150 people, and about 20 of them like clapped, and they're like, yeah. And there was about 2 or 3 of them that were like, no way, you'll never take away knife from us or whatever, which totally exemplified this particular slide. So we focused in on our workflow during that week. Basically, our workflow is like everyone else's, comes from South Park, where nobody really knows what phase 2 is. So we moved on and we actually mapped out, here's what our workflow actually is. Now I won't go into specifics on this, but the big thing that we noticed when we started actually mapping it out was that we were not staging anything like production. Our development stuff would go, the developer would check it in, and it would be on the node within minutes. And it would be up and running in the development domain, which is kind of a mosh pit of all the code just goes in there. But then when we go to production, we have these really long written out like deployment guides that tell us the exact commands to run. So what we wanted to do was actually have something that was clean, simple, and straightforward. So we took the Jenkins cookbook and a collection of knife plugins, and we created what we like to call internally as Spork. Spork was actually branded by David on our team when I was out on vacation. And I came back from vacation, and I'm like, Spork sounds really awesome. Like, is that, are you naming that like after Knife Spork, like John Cowie's plugin or whatever? And David was like, Knife Spork? What are you talking about? I go, oh, all right, so it's not named after Knife Spork, that's fine. Maybe you named it after like Spork, like the parallelization thing that you can use for like Rails tests or whatever. And David was like, what if I told you I have no idea what you're talking about? And I was like, well, so it's Spork, and it's basically Jenkins, and we're going to use a lot of awesome knife plugins, and we're going to automate basically from taking it from source control and then making all the awesome happen. And we were like, oh yeah. So from all those discussions that we had with Michael, we created internal RFCs, which is the next thing that I would really recommend that you do at your companies. The goodness isn't involved in this was like we actually heard what people didn't actually want really early. So we did an RFC on how we should do the information model and how we should do our workflow for releasing and then dependency management. We made the decision early that we were going to go to Berkshelf. So we got a lot of feedback really early, but it's also a double-edged sword because like we put this out there and then a few months went by and we didn't actually have it completed because we were also, interestingly enough, our team was building Hadoop workflow tools. So we're building all these different Hadoop workflow tools and things got pushed down. So everybody just expected this to be done. But I still think that this is probably one of the best decisions that we made the entire time was to involve everybody really early with internal RFCs. We also had a lot of conversations about Conways Law. Our company is set up so that like the solutions that we get out to clients, you saw that initial where the patient is in the center, the teams are set up that way. So very similar to what Jamie was saying yesterday, we wanted all the teams that write applications. You also are responsible for writing your cookbook, which is hundreds of people. So we knew that a lot of people needed to understand the fundamentals of Chef. So what we did was we partnered with Chef, and we did 2 Chef fundamental classes with about 15 hand-picked people that we knew could turn around and teach that content. And then we set up classes, and they're still going on to this day, so about a year and a half later, where it's once a month, and someone that was in that original class is actually teaching the content to someone else in the company. And we've been able to get this out to over 200 engineers in that time. So while we're talking about being economical, and we're an enterprise, we use VMware to provision our stuff. Like it's not very often that we get to use things in the cloud. So to teach the class, we're actually using Microsoft Azure. And as we've heard a number of times at this conference, you can run a Linux box very well on Azure. So we're running these classes, which is actually unheard of at our company, for $20 a class. Nathan from our team has a script where he spins up all the machines we need the night before the class. And we probably could even bring the cost down if we spun them down at night. But we leave them available for all of our attendees to use it that whole night, and they can use it for a day after. And it still only costs us about $20 to run the entire class. So as we move on to 2014, all of those RFCs actually became reality, and we provided the platform to build on. So towards the beginning of the year, we ran a migration workshop where we walked, not only did we want to just provide all the tooling, we wanted people to really level up their cookbooks. So the first rule of teaching is that you want to control all the variables, and that's what we're doing for the Chef Fundamentals class, is like you come in with nothing and we're going to teach you all the differences. These migration workshops, it was pretty much bring your own cookbooks and we're going to actually work through them. So we took the first rule of teaching and pretty much just threw that out the window. And the way we ran this class was everyone was working on their own machine. We had people that were running Macs. We had people that were running Windows. We had people that were running cookbooks that were terrible. We had people that were running very mature cookbooks. And then we would introduce a new concept like Berkshelf. And then the 10 people from my team would actually go around to each individual and like when they were having problems. And then we also had them post all of their errors to IRC. And we were able to get through probably about 10 or 15 core concepts in the course of the day. And having ran this with like 50 people in the class, 3 different times, we were able to get through a majority of the cookbooks that we had. So we looked at the time we ran the class, we looked at how many cookbooks we had across the company, and we had almost 150 cookbooks, and about 87% of them were actually good cookbooks. They had a metadata file, but only a third of them actually had Burke's files or Vagrant and stuff. So what we were able to do was, through only a little bit of work, we were actually able to level up the entire cookbook base for the company. Another thing that happened last year, as Chef has grown, we've cycled through a couple of different success engineers. And last year we got hooked up with Ryan Cragen and Matil, and it's been awesome. Like, the demeanor of Ryan and Matil has been perfect for us. We have weekly meetings. And we've been able to incrementally just like raise the bar on each of the individual things that we're doing. And then we had another session where Stephen Locke came out, and we talked about all the new enterprise features. Now that we got everybody actually on board, it was time to start lifting up that platform and stuff. And this actually just made me feel real good. Like, when Stephen left, I got a big hug, and he just looked me in the eye and said, usually I show up and I'm helping companies go from 0 to 20. You're clearly going from 40 to 60, so keep me in the loop because I want to continue to be a part of your success. And I've seen Stephen a bunch at this conference, and it's just a really good feeling to know that you have people on your side from Chef. So the enterprise features that we've been working on are push jobs analytics, OpenStack connection, and supermarket. And I kind of want to go through each one of those individually to give you like a firsthand account of how we've worked through them. So push jobs is an absolute must-have for almost all of our consumers. The value proposition with push jobs is that we found is that we can actually start doing orchestration. Chef is awesome for setting up one node exactly how you want it, but we need to set up multiple nodes and orchestrate them together. The drawbacks that we've seen is that push jobs 1X is not very mature or feature rich. We're actually going to try to make the move to 2 and then follow that up with 3 as soon as we can. And we've seen a lot of internal issues with networking, which is not a fault of Chef, it's just our actual networking. But it gave us the opportunity to actually do the DevOps thing. For the most part, our team's kind of based around development, and we do quite a bit of top-level ops. But to actually dig in with the networking team and start to do like physical monitoring of Cisco switches, we were able to use the awesome data that's pumping out into the Chef logs and throw that into Splunk and actually see over time that the changes that we were making, whether or not they were actually making a difference. So for us, analytics, the value here is compliance and auditing for non-coders. This is also a must-have. We don't have this actually up and running the way we wanted to yet, but the review that we have is that it's incredibly interesting, and we need to see that latest version. So we've been talking with Chef this week. The feature set that they have in the latest version is incredibly promising, and it's actually going to save us a lot of work because we were going to build a lot of this stuff from hand. And I've already seen a couple of companies this week that have built like some amazing things, but we're actually going to side with Chef here. The drawbacks that we've seen is that the early versions are the search is kind of slightly confusing, and the filtering was not working the way we wanted it to, but it looks like that's getting cleaned up in later versions. Being an enterprise, we're still at the point where we need to ask for a VM and then have a fair amount of lead time before we actually get a chance to use it. So this can be frustrating at times, but we're actually working with a team that's setting up OpenStack. This one, we've proven out the concepts on both sides of using heat templates with Chef to provision a node, and we've used Chef provisioning. So at this point, we're actually siding towards using heat templates, but we still want to see Chef provisioning mature because that would make things flow through the system quite a bit faster. Supermarket is also a must-have as we continue to make our pipeline more feature-rich. Again, one of our core values for our team is we want people to not have to SSH onto the node and then eventually never, ever SSH onto the node, very similar to what Yahoo had just said. So we've actually backed off on this. At the time we tried to use it, it was only Ubuntu ready, and we were able to change the code and get it to work for us on Enterprise Linux. But now there is actually an RPM available for all of these. I think actually an Omnibus installer. So that's something we're going to do later this year. So now we're on to this year, marching towards continuous delivery. We're at about the 1 year mark of having a focused, well-oiled system. We've got well over 3,000 chef nodes involved in hundreds of separate subsystems. So not as impressive as Yahoo with the biggest chef deployment in the world, but it's still pretty impressive because this was kind of one team at a time, working through each individual's issues and then finding places where we can scale. And we've got over 400 users created on the server. We just made the decision last week that we're going to go with Chef Delivery, even after spending a lot of times with Jenkins Workflow plugin for continuous delivery. It might be, from everything we've seen, it's the most impressive application for continuous delivery that we can find on the market. And the one blocker that we're working towards, that we're going to work on as soon as we get back, is working through the sensitive flag. If you're not familiar with this, this comes through a lot of the most recent versions. It continues to be built out. I think Chef 12 has the full feature set now. But you do all this work to encrypt things in Chef Vault or encrypted data bags, and then that ends up getting decompiled and shown in Chef reporting unless you add the sensitive flag of true. So we're working through a way to actually opt out of that by monkey patching with a cookbook, and then as each of our applications gets mature enough that they are sure that they have the flag set for everything, that they've encrypted data, then they can actually opt back out of that. So this kind of goes to the point where I was talking earlier about like getting people to work together. We had a terrible problem, and I don't know if anybody else has this problem, with everybody was forking everybody else's cookbooks, whether that's a community cookbook or even internal cookbooks. So what we decided to do with Enterprise Chef was, even though we have these beautiful organizations, we decided not to use them and throw everyone in together. And that way, the only way they were going to be able to work was that Tomcat cookbook that we have like 6 versions of. Everyone has to work together, and we actually have to start versioning that together and making moves together. So the problem with that is that we don't have ACLs set up into that these people are in these different organizations. So if we start to expose people's secrets, then everyone's going to be able to see everyone else's secrets. So the sensitive flag has been extremely important to us. And then the one thing that I struggle with and want to have conversations with all of you about is where does the line draw on? Thinking back to Adam's talk this morning, like what portion should actually be centralized and what portion should be decentralized? Like I also don't believe that we should have a DevOps team that writes all of the cookbooks for all of the applications, but there's a line somewhere that someone has to run the chef server, someone has to help build that pipeline for the company or whatever. So here we see the model that you have on Wikipedia. I don't think this model just kind of shows that there's different ideas, there's different things, but over time I'm looking for people and ideas on how to actually build that model to actually get that point across of what should be centralized and what doesn't need to be centralized. And I'd also like to actually just thank Chef. We have 6 associates at our company who have contributed to core Chef. We've got another few dozen who have contributed to cookbooks that some of you may use or whatever. And I really want to thank Chef for helping us get over our not invented here syndrome. As we start to move towards doing a lot more with open source, Chef has been instrumental in we've taken some of the Chef cookbooks that we've written. We've actually open sourced our Splunk enterprise deployment cookbook, and it's out there. It's called Cerner Splunk. We use that as an example, and we worked through legal and our entire company to try to get that to actually be open sourced. And that was a fight that we did. It took us months to make that happen, and Chef has been instrumental in helping us do that. So this has been Cerner's journey with Chef, and to reiterate the lessons that we learned over the time that we've been using Chef is to be patient. These things are going to take time, but you also want to be hungry. You want to try to figure out what that next feature is and build it in. Look outward. That's to other companies. As far as enterprises go, I want to have a lot more conversations with other enterprises that are similar to us, that are going through the same thing. As I've sat through talks similar to mine, I see a very common theme of the things that we're working through. And then also Chef. Chef has been instrumental in helping us with all kinds of things. Always remember that you're not going to be able to please everybody, so build those rails, but also let people kind of get out in front. And then know the constraints that you have and work within them. And then our recommendations are that you do have a focused team, but you just figure out where that line is about what should be centralized and what should be decentralized. Focus on that workflow. Build your Spork or whatever it is that your team needs or your company needs. Incent your community to work together, even if that's making terrible decisions, like not using organizations just so people will start to work together. Define how you should use Chef in all aspects, and then educate yourselves and each other, and always involve your friends at Chef. So that's what I have. Thank you. I think we do have time for a couple questions, right? Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
What's your onboarding process look like for someone who either joined Cerner or is beginning at Cerner to use Chef for the first time?
The question was, what does the onboarding process look like for someone that begins at Cerner or starts to use Chef for the first time? We have an onboarding process for new hires, which is pretty amazing, where we have a dev academy. I believe the idea came from Facebook. And instead of going directly to a team, you go to this dev academy and you stay there from anywhere from 2 to 4 to 5, 6 iterations, and you work on projects while you're in there. And they're like full agile projects. They have like a 2-week iteration. And they actually are pulled from Jira, from Teams. So you just simply put a label on there, and it's actual work. So as that new hire, you actually work with teams. And if you're lucky enough, you actually start to work on Chef there. And then that fundamentals class, which is a 2-day course, a lot of the new people, they get to pick which classes they're going to take for their electives after this academy. And a lot of people that move into like our more cloud-based stuff pick that course. So they get onboarded for the fundamentals there. And then as far as teams, they come in, as teams are onboarding, a lot of them come and work with our team, but we're actually the operations infrastructure. Outside of us, there's a services infrastructure, an application infrastructure, and a Hadoop infrastructure team that has been built up over time. So they have what we call a concierge program. So as they're onboarding a team to start doing this stuff that's not new hires like an existing team, they actually have concierges that actually go and work with them to use some of their base level cookbooks, like whether it's a MySQL cookbook or a Rails cookbook or things of that nature. So does that kind of what you're looking for? Yeah.
So it sounds like you have wiki pages. Do you also do stuff like slideshow or screencasts or stuff like that? Or I guess what hasn't worked also as far as educating people to put the rails on?
So the screencast thing is interesting because I'm a huge fan of screencasts. I love them. I love to watch them. I love to create them. And we actually have a wiki page where we've created videos where I took the entire workflow, and it's about 61 minutes to take from a blank screen to a cookbook that's actually released and that you can run in prod. And it's broken up into like 11 segments, so they're only about like 3 to 5 minutes each. And I think this is awesome. And I try to get people to watch it, and it just hasn't worked. Like I don't know what it is. Like when people ask the questions, and then I give them the direct link to one of them to answer their question, they're like, "That was awesome. Why don't you promote this more?" And I'm like, "I talk about it all the time. You should do this." you should watch this. This would help you onboard. So, but I don't take that as a reason not to create those. Definitely create them, but don't be disappointed if not everybody comes to your awesome field of dreams or whatever. It's because, yeah, I look at those and I only see like 20 views and I'm like, oh, darn. And it also, the timing might not have been right. I created those after a lot of people had already been onboarded.
Anyone else?
I saw that you have, you are using Splunk, but also the other monitoring system is...
So his question, he saw that we're using Splunk. Our monitoring system that we use is Zabbix.
So you are using both?
Yes.
What is the difference? You are using Zabbix only for the operating systems, or
So the difference... the difference for us, Zabbix is it's very easy to get connected and up and running, and so we have a cookbook for both Splunk and for Zabbix. But the way that Splunk works, you have to pay for the data that you're streaming in, and Zabbix you don't.
yeah, but
So
my question is, if you are using Splunk for to monitor the application specifically, or Zabbix to monitoring the servers, or are you doing a mix, or how are you doing?
we do a bit of both, and there's not like a clear delineation, like one's for applications and one's for the server. I would say Splunk is more for the applications and Zabbix is more for the server. Where we make the distinction is if you need immediate notification, then that's a Zabbix alert. If you need to kind of trend things over time and get like an hourly update on something, that's more of a Splunk type of thing. And if it's a log file, it's definitely like get that into Splunk so that we can aggregate like across the continuum. Cool.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. It's now break time, so there is a 15-minute break in the exhibit hall.
Thank you.